Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Today I'm here with MPP John Fraser, announcing that we are submitting a letter asking for an investigation into the catastrophe that has unfolded within Ontario's home care system and the failed conception of Ontario Health at Home. This letter will be going to the Auditor General requesting an investigation. I want to begin by reflecting on the words of Sylvia Jones herself, who last week said it is completely unacceptable that people are not getting the needed medical supply and drugs that they need. But this admission of failure does not absolve Sylvia Jones or Doug Ford from the need to understand why this catastrophe has occurred, how it can be stopped, who will be held accountable, and the manner in which it will be prevented in the future. And certainly as we speak, patients continue to not receive the care they deserve at home. They continue to be turned away and sent to hospitals and emergency departments in order to get the desperately needed medications, bandages, IV therapies, saline, supplies, and equipment that they desperately need and deserve. And I want to take a moment to highlight the gravity of the situation. Last week, Dr. Joyce Chung, chair of the Ontario Medical Association section on palliative medicine, said that there are province-wide shortages of medications and even needles that are prompting palliative care physicians to send home care patients to emergency departments. Dr. Hal Berman, one of the district chairs at the Ontario Medical Association, reports that hospitals are literally running low on supplies as their stocks are depleted by home care patients that are coming to emergency departments. A stage 4 cancer patient who was supposed to receive 3 days of medical hydration was only saved after 2 days of not receiving it, after IV therapy was scavenged from other patients. A man with, the stories just continue and are heartbreaking. A man with lung cancer had pleural fluid removed from his chest using non-sterile gloves because sterile surgical gloves were not available. This is not acceptable. And this is not standard of care in our great province of Ontario. Now, it didn't have to be this way. All of this has happened since the new centralized home care super agency, Ontario Health at Home, was conceived. But even at its founding legislation, this exact scenario was entirely predictable. In fact, when we were debating the legislation in standing committee, it had been so obvious to me that this outcome was inevitable. I had put forward myriad amendments, and as a last Hail Mary attempt, had said, please allow Ontario Health at Home 2 years to be brought up, to be raised up before actually taking over as a home care agency. And if not, patient care would be compromised. Of course, the Conservative government would have none of it. They shot down my amendment and they have rammed this super agency through. And now we see the consequences that I had warned of. And so today, I'm asking for the Auditor General to conduct an investigation into the rollout and operations of Ontario Health at Home, with specific attention to 6 areas. First, I'm asking the Auditor General to look into the selection process and criteria whereby home care service providers and suppliers are approved for Ontario Health at Home. I'm also asking whether any of these contracts have been inappropriately awarded. And there have been some, there is a growing list of individuals who are calling out potentially inappropriate ties between some of the home care service providers and this Conservative government. I am asking the Auditor General to look into the chaotic transition that has unfolded to this new home care super agency, with special attention to the policies and processes that may have contributed to the current situation. I'm asking her to look into the catastrophic shortages impacting home care patients, and to explore the role in which supply procurement and distribution processes have contributed to this. We're asking for the Auditor General to examine the cost of current home care shortages, the cost measured in real dollars, and patient suffering. Suffering in terms of morbidity, which is inappropriate illness and disease, and mortality, the number of patients that may have died because they didn't get the care or supplies that they required. This should include the financial costs that have been borne by patients, as well as the impact of unnecessary hospital or emergency department visits and the impact on hospital operations. And finally, I want to make sure that there is clarity on the process by which patients and their families will be compensated for all privately purchased supplies. These represent a minimum standard to ensure that home care patients receive the accountability that they deserve and can count on the care that they deserve moving forward into the future. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, MPP John Fraser.
Thank you very much, Adil. And I'd like to thank Adil. It's a very thoughtful letter when you get a chance to read it. It describes a situation that's unacceptable to be happening here in Ontario. And as many of you already know, I have some experience with caring for people at home. Both my mother and father, at the end of their lives, were at home. My mom died at home. My dad was there until about 3 weeks before he died, and he went into hospice. So it's hard for me to imagine the situations that are being described by people happening to my family. I can't imagine seeing my parents suffer in the way that people are suffering, in the kind of heartache that it would cause for my sisters and myself, the rest of the family. You know, the situation is more than unacceptable. Simple things like hydration and bandages, palliative medications. When they're not there, people suffer. So it's not only unacceptable, it's unfair and unjust what's happening here right now. And we need to get to the bottom of this. The Premier said he's going to get to the bottom of this. And there's a way for the Premier to do that. And he can do that by joining us and asking the Auditor General to do a special audit on what's happened here with Home Care Ontario. It's simple. All he's got to do is write a letter. Actually, it would probably make sure that it happened if the Premier of the province wrote the Auditor General to say, I want you to do this. I think it's important. We want to know. We need to know how this happened, who's responsible, and how we can prevent it from happening again. This may not be a lot of people. It may not be tens of thousands of people. But to even have this happened to one family in our province unnecessarily is wrong. And we need to get to the bottom of this, and we'll take your questions.
So Adil, I mean, you had your questions about this years ago already? Is that what we're talking about, or a year ago?
Absolutely. So Ontario Health at Home was conceived by legislation known as Bill 135, Convenient Care at Home Act. It was so obvious on reading this legislation, on asking questions of ministry officials and of the minister herself, that this government had no clue what they were doing. The only thing that they really knew was that their new home care super agency would be called Ontario Health at Home. It's all in the Hansard. I debated it. I mentioned it in Standing Committee on Social Policy. There was nothing concrete to the legislation. In fact, when I invited ministry officials to tell me how, in concrete terms, this would actually improve the quality of care for home care patients, I could not get a single concrete answer. The only thing that I heard over and over and over again was the repeated use of the buzzword integration. Very clearly, this flawed attempt at integration has failed, has left patients at the wayside, has resulted in compromised care, is overwhelming emergency departments and hospitals, and is undignified and unacceptable.
And so you've heard from people who are still having issues with not receiving supplies?
Where, it continues to be reported. It continues to be reported in my conversations with physicians. Dr. Hal Berman, who has been quoted in newspaper articles. I had conversations with him last week, who confirmed. He's a friend of mine. He confirmed that this is a rampant issue.
Great.
I think we're good.
Awesome. We don't have a line or anything like that, right?
Do you know how many people are affected? Like you said, it might not be a lot, but it might be. Or do you have a sense?
It's hard. You want to go first?
I don't have a number, but it's widely reported by physicians across the province.
Okay.
So here's the problem. It's unacceptable, right? That's what the minister's saying. But there's no other information other than that. Like, how did this happen? How many people is it affecting, right? It's like this black box. And so, you know, it's all well and good to say it's unacceptable, but that's worth this, right? We need to know why, right? We all believe it's unacceptable. We're all shocked at it. But it's like, and just saying, we've ordered, you know, the ministry to do this. Well, what exactly are they doing? They haven't said anything specific, right? So when people have this kind of, are faced with this kind of situation, they want specific solutions to the problems that exist. I had a colleague of mine actually I got the email, came to me secondhand, describing their situation and saying, you need to say something about this. Right? This is just somebody I worked with here at Queen's Park. And very upset. And so, you know, here's the thing about being in home care. You're not really visible. In a hospital, we know there's 2,000 beds or 500 beds, right? In an emergency room, how many people are there? In home care, it's hard to see. It's just a whole bunch of people all across the province. And, you know, there's maybe in Ottawa, there might be 20,000 patients in home care. 20,000, you know? I don't know how many, maybe 100, 50, 75 at the end of their lives, right? So it's just hard to see. So that's why you need the Auditor General to say, here's what's happening and how do we fix it?
Just one final thought. There are 650,000 home care patients across the province. Even if only 1% of those is impacted by these supply disruptions, that's 6,500 people critically or chronically ill, suffering at home, dying at home without the medication, supplies, equipment, and most importantly, dignity that they need.